School of Fashion. Stadia is a new vision in higher education, and it's built on three core principles. It's that of widening access to higher education to our nation, exposing students to the world of work, and also being student-centric in all of our operations and our decisions that we make on campus for the students. Tonight's spring session speaks to widening access. We believe that the fashion industry in South Africa has the potential to grow, and we want to be the educational partner ensuring that does happen. The conversation tonight is focused on the 2030 DTI Fashion Master Plan. That master plan sets out to localize production of fashion, the localization of the supply chain, and also the localization of the retail industry around the fashion ecosystem in South Africa. We as a school align and tailor our qualifications to all of these facets of the fashion ecosystem. And next year we'll be launching our diploma in clothing production, which was specifically focused on making sure that we have the expertise in our country in order to act on this plan and hopefully end up with a very vibrant and economically sustainable fashion industry that will both add to our local economy and also to job creation. I'm now going to introduce you to our two MCs for the evening. It's Jenna Siegel and Nande Silelo. They are both program coordinators in the School of Fashion and our expert academics that will facilitate this conversation with our panelists tonight. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. It's actually lovely to have people, real people. I'm not just talking to myself on a camera, so it's wonderful to have you all here tonight. And Nande, I know you probably feel the same.
Absolutely. It's very good to see new faces as well. Yes. We've been seeing students for a couple of months. Now we welcome new faces.
Absolutely. And welcome everybody online. It's really a pleasure to have both a physical and online audience. It does mean that we can also record this, which is really nice. And I hope you all know that just in case. And apparently the speaker is actually really sensitive. So don't mutter anything you wouldn't want people to hear. All right. So what we're going to do at the start of our session tonight is that we're going to just introduce the topic, introduce ourselves, a little bit about our panelists, and then go into the questions around what our panelists are really here to tell us about. So from my side, I'm Jenna. I am a program coordinator for the retail side of our school, which is basically the BCom in fashion, as well as the BA buying. Yeah, Nande, what about yourself?
Hey, good evening, everyone, and everybody online. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you spending your evening with us. I am Nande Sulelo, the discipline leader of the media programs, and together with Jenna, we're very excited to have this conversation with you guys and definitely have these three very lovely speakers speak to you guys about the topic and what we are doing as a fashion school and as a member of the industry in terms of bringing about conversations, debates about key issues in transforming the industry. How can we get all of these things that the government is putting into place to actually work for the ordinary people? So we are very much excited for tonight's topic. We have lots and lots of questions, and anybody who is online who wishes to ask questions, Jenna will be monitoring the chat. So please feel free to just type in any questions. We will get to them and we will try to respect everybody's time. So yeah, welcome everybody and thank you for joining us.
Excellent. So just to give you a little bit of background, I know some of us are here, like Dr. Sipho is extremely knowledgeable on this topic, but a lot of us are new to the master plan and the idea of what the master plan brings to us. So unfortunately, my memory retention for facts is a little bit poor. So I've got some notes here that I just wanted to share with everybody. In terms of the history, why we've come to this point, I think we're all aware of the fact that South Africa has had a very rocky history of late within the clothing, textiles, footwear and leather industry. And that leads into retail. And from the key points that have been found through researching the master plan and actually moving the industry into a positive growth is that some of the challenges being the tightening of market conditions, international competitors, which is a huge, about 60% of the clothing and retail coming into South Africa is from China, your illegal trading, unfortunately, and credit supply restrictions. So those are some of the backgrounds as to how we got to the point where we need to actually make huge changes within this industry. And of course, that's a huge deal for us from a school of fashion, because that's our bread and butter.
Yeah. Absolutely. And as Jenna mentioned, we're trying to bring in all the different aspects of industry, trying to tie in this conversation with what can we do. And so tonight we're inviting us to think about your role in the different pockets of industry. What can you do in your own space to ensure that the industry is inclusive of anybody who has been excluded previously for whatever reason, or who is experiencing whatever challenges they are experiencing. So today is about trying to be solution-minded and solution-driven. It's about trying to situate ourselves within industry. And Jenna has mentioned that in higher education, for example, we often see that fashion schools cater to the glamorous side of fashion. What about the manufacturing industry? What about all these different aspects that come in between the fashion moves, and Leo has mentioned the diploma in clothing production that we are now starting, and having discussions like these just to open up the debate to the wider audience, to say to everyone, think about this. What is your role in this, whether you're a consumer, whether you are working in industry, or whether you are in the education sector? It is everybody's role to play. Think about the practical and the very sustainable efforts that you can make in your immediate space. So we'd like to invite you guys to move away from the very lazy and performative active inclusion. Think about practical things, practical steps that you can take. And generally, that's what this evening is about. We will tap into the knowledge from our experts, and they will guide us in terms of what is happening in industry, what is happening with the Master Plan 2030. And so the conversation will be around that structured guideline, but think about your own role and the thing. And again, questions you might want to ask the experts while we have them here in this very awesome intimate session.
Absolutely. And there's definitely a side to the 2030 Master Plan that shows us the actual movement towards that change that is necessary. But is that putting people in the right position? Are we really at the space that we know, especially as a school, as an institution of education, are we aware of what comes next and our role to play? And I think that by the end of it, I hope we have a call to action, not just for industry, but also for education, to understand where we sit in the next part of the master plan. So there has been updates, which, there's a lot of change, and we'll hear from the industry experts about that change that's already happened. I'm sure you've all seen, like TFG, for instance, Mr. Price, they've been talking a lot about the big changes, buying of warehouses, those kind of things we'll be discussing, because those are movements towards. And if I just go through the 5 strategic pillars that we have for the 2030 Master Plan, the objectives are crystallized in these pillars, which is basically market growth, both domestic and international. Remember, we still want to be competitive internationally. Value chain localization. Right? So we've got some people in the audience who are value chain experts, where we talk about the fact that we want to make sure that each aspect of how we design, how we create, and how ultimately it comes to the consumer is within a South African space. Competitiveness advancement, as well as value chain transformation, and that's really the key topic for today, and skills and development within technology. Those are those key pillars that you do have to acknowledge that the 2030 Master Plan has outlined for us to talk about.
Okay, so we are now going to get to the questions. We'll now get to the meat of why we are here, and Jenna will be introducing our panelists before we do that. So if anybody has any issues or any questions or anything like that, you are most welcome to engage, or just type it in the chat for the people who are online. We promise we will not ignore you guys. Jenna?
I try my best not to ignore people. I do, I try. So we're gonna have a little bit of a shift of movement now. Nanda's gonna be our main questions asker, and
I like that.
yeah, you're the main question asker. You're the curious one tonight. So we've got Shanghai, who comes to us as she's representing the entrepreneurs, and you've just been representing them so well that we just wanted to come back and have the time for that. We've got Silvers here representing people who own CFTs, are really on the ground doing the hard work, and then Dr. Sipho is coming through from an educational standpoint, which the depth of, like I said, knowledge is immense. So each of them is going to give more of a background of themselves. That's why I don't want any repetition now, to give us an understanding of who they are and why they're here tonight to tell us what they know about today's topic. All right, so we're going to have a little shift of energy. So everybody, if you want to just move around, we're going to have the panelists come onto the stage. I think we could start with everybody just introducing themselves, where you're at in industry, as well as what brings you here to discuss it. Anyone want to volunteer to start with education? This is what we do. We ask the volunteers.
Let's start with the sole gentleman. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Sipho Mbata. I come from Tshwane University of Technology, Department of Design Studies. I'm a senior lecturer as well as head of department there, responsible for the programs up until a doctoral level. My journey into the space of clothing started from a diploma right up until a doctoral level. I did my master's focusing on the development of competitive advantage, focusing on the clothing, textile, leather, and footwear. And that inspired me to move up to my doctorate, focusing on national systems of innovation, also within the clothing, textile, leather, and footwear space. Due to my political background, I have a deep passion for policies, hence the area of my expertise is around that. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Silva. I graduated with a BA in fashion design in 2013 from then Liza, but now Stadio. So this building is actually where I had my third year fashion show. I then went on to do a few internships and then established myself as a freelance pattern maker. After a couple of years of traveling, I came back to South Africa and then started my first business, which was the Joburg Pattern Maker. That same year, I then launched my clothing brand Differently with my cousin Michelle. Differently is an affordable clothing brand manufactured ethically in South Africa. We aim to be quite trendy and have clothes that fit well, but at the same time, it can still be worn over different seasons. So then I thought I didn't have enough businesses, so I started my third one, which was the Joburg CNT, which I started last year, which we are an ethical manufacturer for small to medium brands and retailers. So basically my journey just kind of fell into place. You know, with the current economy, you kind of need to follow where the skills are needed. And you know, I always thought I was going to be this avant-garde fashion designer creating the pieces of art, and little did I know that's not really going to make you money. And let's be honest, we all need to make money at the end of the day. So, I mean, at my first apprenticeship, they were focusing on retail that year. So I wasn't doing all the fun fashion weeks and things like that. We were really focusing on in-house production, and that's really where I learned a lot about production and where I got my passion for, you know, the whole process of that. I'm a very technical and hands-on person, and I have 7 years experience in pattern making. So I just think that pattern making is the most important part of the manufacturing process. You know, this is where you need to focus on fit and the style and the cuts and proportions and the different sizing, and taking a design and making it into a tangible product. But not only that, it's also dictating the manufacturing of the garment. So you really need to know every single aspect of the manufacturing when you're making the patterns. So then from pattern making, it was a natural transition into creating the CMT. And luckily I had a client base that followed me and supported me. I did see a gap for the need of a CMT for smaller businesses that did smaller production runs, but still high-end, good quality garments. So just moving on to from that is that I am a firm believer in human rights and ethical production. There needs to be fair wages for workers and fair working conditions. So that's just really reflected in all of my businesses that I run. So I think it's just really important for the microeconomy of South Africa. You know, when you're purchasing from local brands, it goes straight into the pockets of the garment workers. With my clothing brand, I try and educate my customers how important it is to buy local, to buy ethically produced, because if you're buying from a huge conglomerate, the supply chain is so long that there's just many hands picking out of that profit margin before it even gets to the garment workers or the factories. And a lot of the time, it's not even in the South African economy. So that's just a little bit about me and my beliefs. Yeah, thank you.
I'm Shingai. I run a consultancy called Design Native, and I help people who want to start a fashion brand who don't have a fashion background. So I'll take them from concept right up until launch and everything in between, a lot of what she spoke about. A lot of the frustrations she has as a CMT owner, I sort of fix that so that by the time my customer gets to her, she's getting the best version and ready to manufacture. So I started this business in early 2000. Before that, I was running my own brand for 10 years. I had 3 stores, I had a full studio with lots of employees, and I got burnt out after 10 years and decided to relook at my career and help other people who wanted to start what I did. So my education was from the Durban University of Technology. And then about 4 years into running my own business, I became an entrepreneur at 26, I believe, maybe a bit younger. I realized that I had no business skills. I had no systems. I was just running on my creativity off of my degree. I had lots of ideas and I didn't know how to grow my business. So I attended the Branson Center of Entrepreneurship for 2 years to learn how to be a great business person. And all these years later, I've got a great creative mind and I've got a great business mind, which really helps my clients have successful startups, because the rate of failure is very high in the fashion industry. It's very capital intensive. And people make a lot of silly mistakes with their money and then ultimately don't launch. So I solve that problem for them, from their concept designing, their market research, pattern making, production, styling for photo shoots, right up to their online stores. I guide them or do the work for them so that they can learn the process and learn how to do it properly. That's me. Oh, I'm also an SLP. Short learning program facilitator with Stadio. I teach fashion entrepreneurship once a year. The next course will be in February, and you can inquire about it now.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much for your introductions, and I think nobody here or online can argue against us being inclusive in terms of our panelists. So thank you very much for making the time to come have this very important discussion with us. So to just get things started, I think maybe let's talk about your own experience with the specific master plan. So from the education space, Dr. Sipho, what has been your experience? Have you worked with any part of the master plan that you feel like it's adding value to your specific space?
Yeah, I think it's important to trace back the track record of policies that the DTI has been promulgating within our sector. For the last probably 2 decades, we've been using the Industrial Policy Action Plan, which has always set out the competitive advantage trajectory of the country. The challenge that I got with that policy is that government is not consistent with these policies. 2007, government set out to open up the Center of Excellence for Clothing, Textile, and Engineering at PE. That got operated, I think, a year or two. It shut down due to lack of people with skills to operate in that sector. And some of the research that comes from that has not been taken up into final products, goods and services that are worthy of exporting. 2012, we came back again with another industrial policy action plan and indicated that there's a sizing problem within the country and in Africa of pear shape and so forth. Set up a team to come up with a South African sizing chart. Until today, we are still chasing that sizing chart. They also came up with ideas of upskilling various expertise within the industry, sent people to China for training. Those people got lost in the system. From as early as 2007, we've spotted that the expertise, the managers, the quality controllers in our manufacturing sector are beyond the retirement age. We needed to reskill. That has still not happened. We still have skill shortages. Now, instead of identifying these gaps that are there in these policies and closing them as we move on, boom, a master plan got dropped on the sector. When I look at that master plan, for me, it will give us growth, but I regard it as artificial growth. Why do I say it's artificial growth? It has not addressed the farming aspect of all the fibers that we require in order to ground this local manufacturer. As things stand, retailers import grey fabrics from wherever there are favorable terms, store them somewhere, and use peak response to respond to these challenges. It is artificial because retailers will realize their profits. Only the retail sector will increase their employment. Partly the CMTs will do, but you are not targeting the entire value chain as far as the development. Another critical challenge, there's seed clusters that are created within the retail space and within the academy. When you look at the last page of the master plan, it has all signatories or office bearers that endorse it. You will never find any private or public higher education institution that supports the master plan. You will never find the exotic leather cluster or the footwear cluster. All these other clusters that play a critical role, they are not there in that master plan. Fashion designers, they're not there. So when you look at it, you can almost think that there was a particular group that can organize itself that managed to secure continuity for their businesses. But in terms of ensuring that 10 years later, we've got a system here that can really manufacture a garment where all components come from South Africa. I don't think we are there yet. There's an African Growth and Opportunity Act, which is a USA Act that should give us duty-free exportation to the US. We are not exporting more than 5% to that space because we need to tick all the boxes that every aspect that made this garment is from South Africa or from Africa. So based on the fact that we import a lot of them, that particular sphere. When you look at the policies that the DTI has as well, the incentives, the grant schemes, they will never cover CMTs because there's a particular threshold in terms of income that you must make in order to qualify. Large manufacturers qualify for those grants. Instead of manufacturing, they shift work to CMTs. CMTs are not price setters, they are price takers. So they get the absolute peanuts in terms of that money. And these companies declare profits every day, but they apply to DTI and say they don't have the means to operate. So those that are privileged will increase their finances. Those that can employ will employ, but the local spheres, you will not impact them with this current master plan. The township economy, you will never impact with this master plan. So there are a lot of gaps with this master plan that can limit. I'm not saying there won't be growth, but it's half of what South Africa would be capable of. I'm yet to touch the lack of expertise in the university space. that should lead research, product development. Key countries have what they call spin-off companies or research unit in universities that make sure that innovative design actually see the day. CPUT is one of the leading in terms of that technology station, but also they are constrained by the fact that when they have innovative products, to launch them and put them in the market, some grants cannot cater for that particular space. So I'll end there for now.
Thank you very much for that very detailed discussion. If anybody wasn't sure what we're talking about today, he encapsulated every aspect of our discussion today in his response. If you are still lost, you will catch it very quickly, but he summarized everything we'll be talking about today. Thank you very much for that. We will get into the depths of all the different aspects. And on to you, Silva. How have you experienced the master plan? What has it meant to you as a business owner, especially with through businesses? You have different experiences with what the master plan seeks to achieve.
So, I mean, like I said, I started the CMT about a year ago, so we're still quite small as opposed to a lot of these bigger companies that are getting grants and things like that. So just from my perspective, the way I see it is, as a third world country, we really have the opportunity to look at other countries and see, you know, what are they doing wrong or not good enough, and we can essentially leapfrog over them in our policies and procedures and the way that we build the garment industry in South Africa. So if we look at things like pollution, you know, that's a really big factor, but I won't touch on too much on that. Another thing is, like I've touched on, ethical fashion. You know, we need to have fair working conditions for our garment workers. We need to have fair wages, a livable wage. And another thing is also just educating the consumer. You know, there's a lot of imports in South Africa at the moment. A lot of people would rather buy a 200 Rand top that they can wear once, post on Instagram. Whereas a lot of them don't understand that if you buy a product that is made locally, goes straight into the economy. It's everybody sitting here, that money goes into our pockets. And I think, you know, that's one of the things that will help grow the garment industry, is educating the customers to buy local and support local. So, yeah.
Thank you very much for that. And Shiana?
So I have a slightly different approach because of the type of clients that I work with. So within my consultancy, in the 2 years that I've been running it, I've helped about 52 brands. And those 52 brands are global. They're not just South African brands. But what they all have in common is that they want a made in Africa product. And like the doctor was saying, a fully made in Africa product is pretty impossible to do. So I end up using a lot of third-party people, especially for components. And for a lot of the fabrics, especially those fabrics that the clients, if they're insisting on ethical fabrics, it's very hard to find a consistent chain from where was the cotton farmed to where was it dyed, and you know, what are the water practices, and you know, was it digital printing that was used, and what are the labor practices behind that? So I have to think about all those small things. So it's been really interesting because now I don't run my own factory. Instead, I choose to help as many different kinds of businesses by not limiting them to just what I could make within my own studio. I partner with CMTs and manufacturers that specialize in different areas. There's a lot of research that I had to do myself to figure out, and a lot of information that people don't want to give about their employees' wages and working hours, and they don't want me to go into the back of the factory to see what their working conditions are. But I have to answer to those questions when I've got a client in New York who's starting a green brand, because 5 years down the line, our consumer is incredibly savvy now and incredibly sensitive. We can't lie to them anymore. H&M and Shein are being sued for greenwashing, so we can't lie to them anymore. So I'm really hoping that within this this new initiative that we're doing, at the very least, we can be a bit more transparent as suppliers and a bit more visible. Those who are doing good work get more work, and those who've got questionable practices are brought to the light, so that we're not, you don't find out after you've spent hundreds of thousands of rands that either your people aren't skilled or working conditions are unreliable, or all these little problems that startup businesses have to discover by making mistakes. So I hope this this new initiative is going to sort of clean that up and not just keep the information to themselves, like you were saying, but to make that database open of who's getting the grants and who needs the business and what are their hiring practices and their manufacturing practices and their import practices. Because importing, it's always going to be a thing for manufacturing. We can't make everything everywhere, but hopefully we'll be able to import more within the continent, because there are different countries specialize in different things. You go to Lesotho for something, to Mauritius for something. South Africa is incredibly privileged. If we have any viewers who are in anywhere else in Africa, I've had clients from just neighboring countries in Zambia or Uganda, Angola, Senegal, and they don't even have CMTs. They all work with tailors who are incredibly skilled and can cut a garment without a pattern and it'll be beautiful, but they can't scale that because there's no consistency. So then they'll come to me because they want to scale their business so they can actually have a product they can export to 5 boutiques around the world and it all looks the same. So we're already in a privileged place as South Africans, and we have access to people like Silva and CMTs and manufacturers, and even people who import fabrics for us. But in order to grow that industry, one, they need to be more visible, they need to be accountable, and they need to have consistent practices that are reliable so we can bring more business in here. We can be an ethical manufacturing hub if we do this right. The foundation is there. We just need to build on it and start building from this foundation that we're at and not let us get too big with bad practices. This is a great time to start implementing all these new ideas.
Absolutely, and thank you very much for that, because you've led us on to the next question. And I like that the two of you have already touched on the very realistic change, the inclusion or the transformation of the industry being actually real and practical, that it can be visible to people instead of just saying, you know, and just giving the impression that you are doing things that you might not necessarily be doing. Yeah. So let's talk about the specifics in terms of what needs to change. You have just outlined some of the very important ones. Maybe let's go to you, Dr. Sibongile Silva, and you just very briefly outline key specifics that need to change within or transform within the value chain in South Africa. And maybe just say, okay, this is what needs to change at this part of the value chain.
Yeah, I think for me, it's the expansion of the value chain as we traditionally know it. The master plan, they call it a simplified version of the value chain. I'm yet to see an extended aspect so that we can really say that, yes, all the role players are in this value chain. But I've made mention of the farming sector, and that should be in that value chain. There's the ICT sector. That should form part of the clothing value chain is also not well represented there. There's a lot of technology that has been brought into the space. South Africa will always chase that because we do not have that part configured into our value chain. The relationship between higher education institutions with the entire value chain also needs to change as well. South Africa is one of the rare countries that partake in the clothing, textile, and footwear space, yet they don't have all qualifications that are required to operate that entire value chain. So that relationship needs to change. The speed to market of innovative products that either come from research or just brilliant individuals that South Africa has also needs to change. Laduma struggle to just launch these products due to the lack of expertise in the country, just to name a few. So there must be that ability to act quickly that is facilitated by how integrated the value chain is. There's various funding instruments that are there in various government departments. They are also not well integrated to ensure that they pump life into the existing value chain. Designers are also seen as a side entity within the value chain. You cannot place them when you look at that value chain, exactly where do they belong. And it always worries me that you can have a designer 10 years, they keep on throwing collections, but you don't see how are they scaled up into the retail space or even exported into other markets. So those shifts are necessary in our space. there's a lot of miseducation that you also find when you go buy fabrics. You cannot get a distinction that these are South African made fabrics, these are international ones. So even Silver and Shanghai, those that are passionate about sustainability, when they get to that space, they are unsure whether what they are buying supports the drive that they are pushing or not. So there has to be that stronger alignment, but people want to do it quickly. I don't think it's possible. We still need another 10-year plan that includes all stakeholders, target the youth of this country, so that they are the ones that 10 years later must say, we know what we endeavor to have as a value chain. We are now leading this value chain. So that has to change.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. And Silva, from your side, maybe just outline the aspects or the specific parts of the value chain that need the most attention.
Well, I think just following up on the doctor, there really is a glass ceiling in this economy with how much you can scale up to. I mean, there's a lot of resources that me as a small business owner, I don't have access to. There are a lot of technological advances that can be put in place to streamline the manufacturing process, to speed up the creation of garments, and to also increase our profit margins. But we don't have access to it. There isn't a lot of resources in South Africa. The supplies that we do go to, a lot of them are imported. We don't know how ethical it is behind the dyeing process of fabrics, leather that comes in, how are those animals treated, and there's a lot that we don't understand, don't know at the moment, which would be great if we could, like he said, build the resources in South Africa, so that we have more options in South Africa for resources. But one of the other things that I've noticed, and it's a big struggle for me, is the amount of skills. So there isn't a lot of places for underprivileged people. People don't have access to expensive higher education, to just go somewhere to a technicon or a technical college just to learn the basics of sewing a garment so that they can at least get a starting job in a factory and progress from there. I don't have the resources, the time, or the money to teach people as much as I'd love to. There's just no way that I know personally where somebody can just go to, it's not that expensive. They can just learn the basics of sewing and come into the industry and grow from there. So that, I think that's one of my main issues as a business owner, looking for staff, looking for competent staff. It's incredibly difficult at the moment. And you would think that with a lot of people needing jobs, a lot of people would want to get into that, but there's just no access for them,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that leads us to the next one, and I'll start with you, Dr. Sipho, because you touched on this earlier when you spoke about the township economy and where that leaves the informal sector, and whether or not the master plan even caters to that market, if it even has any plans for that market, or is it just a very artificial plan that says those who are already benefiting will make something of it. So talk to us maybe about that and how we can bring that sector into the space.
I think to bring that sector into the space, you need to structure its own strategic plan, that sector, because from what I've understood until now, working or doing research around these policies, it's a question of who funds these projects that gets to reap the rewards. The township economists don't have the financial muscle to say, we want to understand what will it take for us to grow. But retail does. Hence, we have the master plan today, and it's echoed around the retail sector. So for me, I just think when government designs their various ministries, I don't think they drill deep into representing each discipline or each craft to ensure that they can develop its economic progression. As it stands, I can't tell you where township economies are placed, but I can tell you they require a new strategy that will see their development or growth. There are a number of challenges that they face. My greatest frustration is that any funding that is available at the DTR the minimum thresholds, no township economy practitioner will ever qualify for those. The Ministry of Small Business has not caught up to that aspect as well. So maybe they need to reorganize themselves, firstly claim a stake in that particular area, but I feel the education of the societies or communities in terms of how important to buy from their own is critical. The book I credit for that is The Capitalist Nigger, which clearly demonstrates how that can be done. So the miseducation even of students in high school also affects fashion or entrepreneurship. Some miseducation that we do, even at tertiary institutions, also leave our graduates less equipped. Shanghai indicated that as much as she was a graduate, she still needed to learn certain skills. So there must be that national identity shift in terms of what it means to be in this sector, what are the pillars that should be focused on, and how do we support the growth of that sector. The township economy, you will never find a designer from the township that supplies directly to a retail store. That just tells you of how fragmented the master plan is, or how distant the township economy is. Others can come and argue that it's dominated by foreign nationals, but whatever the case is, that is a space that exists and it's suffering. It might die a slow death in a few years.
Absolutely. I think what is important to note or to remember, or at least just acknowledge, is the impact that the township economy has. Most of us know an old gogo who can sew, who can do all of these things, but they don't really have anything to benefit from structures such as the master plan. From your side, Chingai, and somebody who runs a consultancy who works with different kinds of businesses, different sizes, what would it take for a township brand to make it, especially using whatever resources available from the master plan?
I agree with you heavily on what you say, because I have had people with less means approaching me to help them with the businesses. And I, just like everybody else, I need to make a living as well. They normally cannot afford me. I would love to help them. And again, like you were saying, I'm the kind of person that these initiatives should be saying, you know what, you have the skill set to understand how for these businesses to become as profitable as quickly as possible. And you have exposure to a global audience that they don't have exposure to. They barely have exposure to an audience outside of their immediate environment that they're trying to sell to. That's why you don't see their products in the big retailers, because they don't quite understand the mass market outside of their own world, which is really a big stumbling block, because they also don't have the access to networks. You get some superstars who come out of the township, like Batu, and it's an amazing story because it's so rare. And so working with the smaller clients, I'm always trying to now redirect how I deal with their business, to start with smaller capsule collections, simpler pieces, and then trying to connect the dots on the networks where that they don't have access to, that I have access to. So if I see a brand with a lot of potential and they have a small capsule collection to sell, I know a boutique owner that would be interested in that brand. Once I've helped work them to the point where that brand owner is not looking at this new designer as an uneducated person who's going to be a problem to work with, because they have some reassurance that they're working with somebody who understands the industry, which is me. So that's the role that I play for smaller, underfunded businesses, but that is a very slow process. I would love to be able to accelerate it and do this for multiple brands, but it's just not possible to do that in a private capacity. So hopefully this program, where the way they're allocating funds, more people like me can, because there's so much potential and so much talent and so much drive in the township, so much creativity and understanding of culture and the vibrancy. We're losing something by not engaging with that part of society, because I find when I'm working with clients of a certain privilege, all their ideas start to sound the same. I cannot tell you how many athleisure ranges I launched in 2020. right? We're all wearing tracksuits and sitting on our Zoom with our Apple, computers. And then, there would be, I remember there's this one client, I won't mention them by name because I don't know if I have permission to, who came from the township, who had saved up 5 years to launch this range and had to spend every penny very carefully. And they were launching an underwear brand for transgender people. And I was like sparked because I was like, this is different, and I was so excited to run into this. And they're not actually selling locally. She's found a market in the US. I think she launched about a month ago. So it wouldn't be well known yet, but I think she's going to do incredibly well with this brand. And ideas like that only come from places where, I don't know, there's something really special about coming from a place of difficulty and having a big dream, because you take every opportunity very seriously and you really work for it. If there isn't somebody there to fund you and bail you out, and this is your bread and butter, those ideas can be spectacular. So I hope that this new initiative doesn't ignore this sector, because if you look at the people who have made it globally, the Ladumas, the Tebes, they're not coming from a place of wealth. They're not coming from, and that creativity comes from their culture, their stories, and their stories really touch people because it's so different from what the mass market, they're buying into. It's so different from what the mass market knows, what their everyday middle class life looks like. These people didn't come from that, and their stories are amazing. They're colorful, and there are a lot of people who don't have a voice because they don't have access to, like Tebe had Lysoff as his launching pad, which gave him access to AFI, which got him a winner in Fast Track, which gave him access to applying for the Louis Vuitton Prize. And it's like all those little connections have sort of helped him get to where he is now. But that's not the norm. It's always the exception.
Absolutely. Maybe let's start with you for this next one. You touched a little on the impact that the foreign. No, I think that was Dr. Siku touched on the impact of the foreigners, but I'll start with something eye on this. I mean, we've seen in different industries how they try to limit the international space and how it filters into us. We've seen it in agriculture, we've seen it in music, we've seen it in film, for example. For this sector, what does it mean, and how can we have a healthy relationship with limiting how much we take it from the outside versus what we send out to the rest of the world?
I don't think we need to limit or either way, things coming in or things going out. It's more about curating what we're taking in and what we're sending out. So that's a global perspective, and very few designers healthy, just servicing the South African market. Very few have. And the retail sector are giants, the Woolworths, the Sheins, the Truworths, the I'm trying to remember. The eggplants. Those guys, they're very big and they're very used to not working with local brands. You don't find local brands, whether township or privileged, in the retailers. At least if they do get in, they're not in there for very long. We don't have that kind of relationship with, whereas overseas, you will see there's a whole system of agents that work with buyers in stores like Neiman Marcus and Printemps, Paris. Like, there's a way to get into those stores. And those are massive numbers. And how does that feed back to us in South Africa? It grows businesses like hers, because if a client comes to her and says, I've grown immensely, I've always worked with you as my manufacturer, I want to keep working with my manufacturer, I'm going to invest in your business and buy you 10 more machines so we can afford to hire 10 more people, because I need you to keep making my range so I can have that consistency. That's how it feeds back. So the relationship has to be symbiotic. And we cannot look at a Zara coming into South Africa as, more competition, because their story is completely different. It serves a market. We as Africans have got a story that they're equally as interested in listening to in Europe, in Australia, in the US. And if we can tell our stories in those markets, which a lot of, there's some prolific designers who are telling those stories internationally, they're starting to see success that way. That's how businesses grow. And in order for us to get more information from people like Laduma on how to do knitwear in South Africa, his business needs to be in a position where he's got time and money to want to feed that back into his community, because he's probably going to be thinking, it's not competition for me for someone who starts a mohair jersey company, but if they come to me, I want to be able to have the time and resources to do that. He's not going to do that if his head is buried in his business all the time, trying to think where his next dime is coming from. So international exposure, fantastic. Working with international retailers who welcome us. People don't realize it's not so hard to sell internationally. You just have to understand how those markets work and understand how to work with agents and how to present your brand in a professional way. It's a progression. And if you can do that for your business, then it frees up more time so you can pass on that education and that information to the next brand, so that we can grow. We can have a presence overseas as much as Zara and Forever 21 or H&M have here. It's just a different market. And Africa has to work in the luxury market, really. We're not fast fashion people by nature. The way we manufacture is slow fashion. So that's fantastic. I hope that doesn't change. And that's very much valued in the rest of the world. So we should build on that and not try to be a fast fashion nation. We know what we are. We work with CMTs. We've got 3-month lead times, and it's a whole process. And there's a lot of thought that goes into it. That's great. That's a sellable thing. So let's sell that. Let's sell that skill set and that mentality to the international people who are looking for sustainable brands. We're inherently sustainable just in our working practices and how we create our ranges. We'll talk about, labor and all of that on the side, but we're still a better option. Our labor practices and our labor laws still protect our workers better than a lot of factories in China, for example. Yeah, so we're good there.
Very true, very true. I think what you said resonates quite a lot with people who are in this room, and everybody agrees with that. And thank you for that. We've come to the end of the first session where we're talking about what needs to change. We'll now move on to the progress. We're looking forward, we're looking for solutions. And I think maybe we can take maybe half a minute just to breathe and get water for our panelists. And whilst we do that, Jenna, maybe, do you have any questions online?
No questions online. I think they're just absorbed with all the information. I wonder if there's a question maybe in the audience here. Does anyone have anything that they would like to ask while we take a break?
So my question is actually to Dr. Mbata. I've experienced this in the past as well because I am a program coordinator for the honors students who generate research and really want to develop solutions to the problems that the South African industries are experiencing. But I find that working both from a public university moving into a private university, one of the big barriers is once you've done that research, you're now dealing with the issue of copyrights. And I was just wondering if you experienced the same, you noted the same in your research. Like how do we actually get products developed by students who can actually be profitable and be worth it, to get it out of the library and get the research out into the world?
Yeah, I think you're touching a current aspect that we are trying to navigate at TUT as well. I also regard my doctoral studies as something that I should patent because that's where the National Systems of Innovation comes from. But a lot of our students are not aware when they register on the documents they sign, they are handing over their intellectual property to institutions. It's there. So a challenge now comes when a student has this exceptional idea that they want to own, but they've signed it off. So we need to educate students, on that aspect. I'm not encouraging that they don't sign it off, but universities must be aware that once an innovative finding is there, they need to be quick to act on it. Earlier, I spoke about spin-off companies or research entities within universities. Traditionally, these are entities that have nothing to do with teaching and learning, but everything to do with what we call the fifth mission of universities, which is to engage in socio-economic development. And they need to use these products for that purpose. At TUT, we've invented a prize tag for the blind people. We call it a brain tag. There's a doctoral study now that's finalizing that it's patented as well, What we don't have now, it's a spin-off company that will run these tags into various retail stores. So that's a challenge. So one of the things I'm promulgating through these national systems of innovation is the reconfiguration of higher education institutions, even the private sector ones. You can't run a project that has a research element without having a spin-off company that will run quickly and turn it into products. Most of our innovation is in libraries because we are just not aware that it's innovation, or we don't even know how much we can commercialize that. Other universities have adopted the Silicon Valley method and try and have everything within one space, and they tend to spin that out much quicker. CPUT is closer to achieving that, but then you find that funding is a problem in South Africa. You get that exceptional idea, you want to run quick with it. Government does not know how to handle that innovation. When you need to get funding, you go through all these hoops that you might not even have the necessary requirements that they need. Then the product doesn't go to market quicker. You find international bodies, when they catch on to it, they approach a person, they buy it from them, they launch it. We're going to lose our fabric heritage. Because of that, we are going to lose our innovation because we are not quick to jump into that space. So we need to reconfigure.
Thank you very much. I will let Leo just bring water for our panelists just so they can catch a break. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for everyone's patience. I see people also needed a little bit of a body break on the online session. You missed out on a great chat. Sorry, guys. That's the mic on. But we're going to carry on into the next part of our discussion today. Thanks, Linda.
All right, thank you, Jada. Back to our panelists. Let's now talk about progress. We like having these friends, and I think you've outlined beautifully the history of the policies that we usually have, but we never see anything come to fruition out of that. Now let's talk about the current master plan. Should we be seeing any progress right now? Is there anything that we need to start taking note of? Is there any progress or any major milestones that have been achieved thus far?
I think for me, the greatest milestone is the arrest of the decline of the clothing sector. I think that was a great achievement. I think most retail stores have now caught up to how to reduce their operating cost by holding this grey fabric that they need to keep their expenses lower. That has worked. The DTI has managed to finance the upgrading of the manufacturing equipment for compliant industries. Unfortunately, CMTs can benefit from that because they don't meet these minimum regulations. I think also there's been an increase in the exportation of our garments that are made locally. And I think there's some stride in also increasing the space of locally produced garments in our retail spaces. I think there's been growth as well in the employment space that I think should be applauded. It's not yet clear whether we've clamped down on the illegal importation of garments and the under-invoicing, that the jury is still out on those aspects.
All right. Thank you. I'll move on from that because you've touched on quite a lot of other topics that we will be discussing very shortly. Let's talk about, if we're going back to this issue of performativity and how everything is just window dressed, it's not real issues being really addressed. Let's talk about compliance because you've just mentioned that right now. Let's talk about what does it mean for the different aspects of the value chain to be compliant? What should they be compliant to make sure that this master plan is a success?
I think the basic compliance aspects that keeps everyone on their toes is complying to the minimum regulations, which are largely mirrored around the minimum wage. The compliance aspect that everyone is now catching up to, it's around sustainability. I'm not quite sure South Africa has a template on how to regulate that, how to measure it, and so forth. I've got a master's student that's working on that aspect. So 2 years from now, we will know what's happening around it. I think those two compliance elements are still not sorted out. I'm not sure what happened with the non-compliant companies in South Africa, whether did we manage to onboard them to be compliant and so forth. So that's also another gray area that I'm not fully conversant about recently.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And Silva, let's move on to you. With your experience with your businesses, from a business perspective, what do you think should be like a measuring stick? What do you think can also assist businesses to be compliant?
Well, I don't think there is a very clear, drawn out process. So I think if we had more access to something that was very clear for businesses to follow. And I am still quite a small CMT, so there are a lot of procedures that need to be taking place once you go to a certain amount of people. But I just feel as though when it comes to staff, like you said, minimum wage, I pay my staff above minimum wage, and that's just something that is really important. So yeah.
Yeah. Short and sweet. Short and sweet. And Jangai?
So from an entrepreneur's perspective, when you're starting your business, you're setting up your own systems and what's going to work in that space. Some self-promotion. I sell a business checklist on my website, dsgnnative.com. And on that checklist for small fashion entrepreneurs, it covers everything from have you registered with CIPC? Check. Are you tax compliant? Do you have an accountant? And please, when you start your businesses, just get an accountant from day one. Don't leave it till later, because once you get behind with SARS for 1 year, it's going to follow you for the next 10 years to get it right. It's going to cost you a lot more to hire someone to fix it. So just get an accountant up front, you know, and it's a 5-page checklist. Not that you have to check everything before you start, but it's sort of like goals that you're going to try and meet. Everything from how much time can you give to your business to are you compliant with your taxes, with your employment practices, with your business registration, and are you putting back into the community in the form of taxes and so forth. Make sure your compliance is right there, because a lot of people start their businesses, they're not even registered, their money's going into their personal accounts. It's not, you know, it's a whole thing. So so I do sell a checklist like that online, but it is important for you to have basic business understanding to help you be a compliant business person, and understand the fashion entrepreneurship space. Though a lot of business principles apply to whatever business you start, because fashion is so capital intensive and you spend so much money just to get your first product to market before you even know if you're going to make a cent, which is really scary. Being as compliant as possible from the beginning with the public things and putting systems in place within your private business, so that as you grow, you know that, okay, when I hit this revenue, I can register for VAT. I don't have to do it straight away, but I can do it later, and there'll be money coming in. And understanding trade agreements like the AGOA agreement that you mentioned, things you can take advantage of. Understanding labor practices and what the minimum wage is, so you're not hiring someone and then all of a sudden you need 3 or 4 people, but you've been underpaying person number 1, and then now you're on the Department of Labor's radar. You know, it's like small things like that catch up with you very quickly. So it's in order to remain compliant, it starts with the small things as a startup and setting up systems from day one that are systems for growth. You're not setting up a business for you as one person. You're setting up a business with the intention of growth and massive growth, and all your systems should be able to grow with you quite naturally. And that's going to help you be a compliant business person from day one. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I don't know where people are going to get this education, but you can start with the checklist.
Absolutely. Maybe that's where you come in.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about economic inclusion. We did touch very briefly on how the township economy is excluded from all of these plans and infrastructures. And so, you mentioned that you pay your staff more than the minimum wage, but what does economic inclusion mean for this sector, especially if we are taking it from the people who have always been marginalized, the people who don't have the qualifications, for example, the people who have self-taught how to work in these different aspects of industry, or the people who don't have enough money to actually start a registered entity. You know, those people who are functioning on the fringes of the sector, what does economic inclusion mean for them? Let's start with you, Dr.
I think it starts with setting them up, as Shanghai indicated, that the bare minimum in terms of what is expected of anyone operating or producing these products, they need to firstly be able to tick those boxes. But I think for me, I speak a lot around the government area because that's what I understand a lot.
That's why you're here.
Thank you. There are a lot of these international relations, visits, bilateral trades that South Africa engages in, embassies all over the place and so forth. But it's very rare that government can, on this industrial program, where they target a designer and say, for this year, we are going to take you to every government international relations meeting we go to, every roadshow. We're just going to make sure that we are launching this particular individual. I don't think our government even has a grant to say any fashion week, major fashion week that takes place in the world, let's pick people from previously disadvantaged communities. Let's target them, let's ship them to those places. It's not there. The world is dying for products from Africa and South Africa, but we are just not saying we are here. China is dominant because they claim their presence, they claim their spaces, but we've just let those entities to be exploited by those that understand that the world needs them and Africa is not ready to jump into these spaces. You get a lot of Chinese contacts asking you, do you want to come? Do you want to do designs for us? Because they want this innovation that we have. And once they get it, they scale it up quickly. So for me, if we can have that, target these various communities, know that at least in a vicinity of each community, there's a closest CMT. That can run that. We typically make jokes about people operating in the township economy, where we put an expensive dress that somebody from the local community wanted, the local designer messed it up. You know, it's typically a joke, but it's a cry for help that we want to produce this, but we just don't have expertise to do that. So the inclusion also has to work in that particular space. That's a space that probably universities should close, have weekend lectures for communities that engage in that space, you know, but these are areas that are not yet understood. Yeah.
All right, thank you. And so from a business perspective, what does economic inclusion look like for the people who are on the fringes of the sector?
So I just feel like from my perspective, there is definitely a skills shortage. And I did touch on this before, where there is no access to people who are living in rural communities or who are disadvantaged. They don't have access to somewhere where they can just learn the skills and that equips them to be hireable. You know, as a business owner, you know, it is quite difficult to find somebody who has these sets of skills that, you know, you can grow your business with. I've heard stories of these ladies that I met that I did a project with, amazing ladies who are very good seamstresses, and they were telling me, yeah, you know, we went to the Technikon in Joburg, we learned how to sew, and I'm thinking, I've never heard of that, you know, it's just not around anymore, you know, there isn't this kind of access. So that's just something, you know, from my perspective as an employer, to have those kind of skills, and it's very difficult for people to have access to that, which I think, you know, you need to look at the bottom. You know, in order to grow, you need to look at what are the issues at the bottom so that we can grow up to this economy and to this 2030 master plan that we're all envisioning. How can we do it if we just don't have the skills?
Absolutely, thank you. Shilan, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think we're also not putting enough pressure on our private sector to tackle this issue, because I'll take Foschini as an example because that's where I started my career. One of the reasons I started my career with them was they were one of the only retailers at the time, and I'm talking this is 2007, who had a design center. Everybody else, if I was coming out of fashion school, I was immediately training to become a buyer. And I wanted to be a designer. That's where my passion was. And Foschini was the only one that had a training program for designers. And if you know that they've started that before I even joined them, compared to all the retailers now, you can understand why they have a huge commitment to increasing their local manufacturing. One, it's a competitive advantage because they are looking at Zara and saying, how do they turn things out so quickly? It's because they've got a local supply chain. So they're emulating that, but the knock-on effect is that's great for us. But now where I would challenge a company like Foschini that does do local manufacturing is to open their doors for apprenticeships, because not everybody can afford an education. Though we have the clothing production program, if I got the name correct, opening up here at Stadio, which is brilliant. Even if you have bursaries, I'm not sure between marketing and language barriers and access to technology that even if somebody who was being offered a bursary, if you're best and brightest, are going to apply for the program if they know it exists. But they do know of Foschini. And if Foschini is advertising that anyone who wants to learn how to sew, anyone who wants to understand how to cut using something other than a scissors, like what are they called? The rotary blade. Using a rotary blade. Anyone who wants to come and learn how to read a pattern, you know, we do a 6-week apprenticeship where you can come and learn those skills. In fact, if you own a small CMT and you want to upskill your people, we do a free 6-week internship where you can send your cutter in and they can learn on a huge floor with the best machinery and the best access to technology, and have pattern makers who cannot learn how to do digitize patterns because they don't have access to machinery, but they want to learn that skill. You know, a Foschini has 5 of those machines and 4 of them aren't even being used. You know, they actually have they have access to those things. They have them in their space. They have educated people who can teach them. And I guarantee you the seamstresses and the production managers there would be excited to do that as part of like corporate CSI, even if it's once a year, where they have lectures and they have people in the production space. It's even amazing to me how many fashion graduates never enter. They go into a lot of studios, designer studios, but they never actually go into a real factory where they're making hundreds of the same thing. To explain, I remember when I was lecturing here, I was lecturing the subject fashion practice, and I was trying to explain to these students how a fashion line works. That in China, you learn how to put on a sleeve, and that's all you do for 20 years. It's just putting on a sleeve. Every sleeve is exactly the same. They become the masters of sewing sleeves, and then they'll pass it on to the person behind them who sews on the collar, and that person only sews on collars. That's a real, like when you're dealing with thousands and thousands of garments, that's how the line works. In South Africa, our studios, a lot of them, one person does a garment from start to finish. But it's only because a lot of CMTs don't actually understand why that is efficient and why you can get 3,000 garments that look identical coming out of China, but there's slight differences in our local manufacturing. Is because if one person is doing a sleeve all the time, that sleeve is going to be exactly the same every single time. Small practices like that. But when you have a studio, you normally have one person with a garment from start to finish, or at most you'll have 3 hands on a garment at any given time and not always doing the same processes. So small things like that, I think the private sector needs to open up their doors a bit more to the public and definitely open up their doors to people who are good at sewing but don't have an education in it, who cannot get jobs with people like Silva because their skill set is not quite refined enough. The private sector can afford it too. As like they do corporate CSI, building football fields and everything, but they're forgetting their own industry. There's so much skill and talents. And if we do that as well, we close the gap with the skill shortage with specifically South African seamstresses, machinists, and mechanics. There's a lot of skill set coming from outside of Africa because they get those apprenticeships.
Absolutely. And I'm grateful to you guys for having these solutions and all of this. And I hope people who are watching online are taking notes and just making sure that they're getting all of this information and seeing how they can implement it within their space. Jenna, I will ask you a question and then bring you into this conversation.
Thank you.
We did talk about not ignoring people, so I will not be guilty of that. I do want to ask you about the role of higher education institutions. I know Dr. Sipho mentioned at the beginning of the session that higher education has a role to play in all of this. We have quite a lot that we can offer, but maybe we're also not within the center. We're also operating on the periphery of this master plan. So where do we come in as higher education?
So, Nanda, I can just say to you, and I apologize that the audience is on TV, but don't worry, some people are looking. We have a tremendous opportunity to engage with every single sector within this country, within internationally as well. So, for instance, Shanghai brought up the whole idea about, what about factory, people coming into the space, and we actually had a conversation with one of the big retailers to say, what do they need? And they said, well, we need professionals who've actually walked into the factory. So there's an interesting gap there, because if we don't know what retail wants, or if we don't understand what these big companies, small companies want, then how can we actually facilitate the education around it? So every single year we have ongoing conversations with industry, with other educational institutions to see what's out there, what do we need to up our game. We have program reviews. We've just finished ours now. Well, we're in the process of finishing it for our BA, our Bachelor of Arts in Design and Buying and Media, and we have to update them. They cannot stay stagnant. It's not one of those things that like mathematics is mathematics. Fashion is not the same as it was 5 years ago versus 10 years ago, etc., when these programs were designed. So these conversations with industries are happening, and that's one of the reasons why we have these events as well, so that people also become educated through these voices.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Jenna. And Dr. Sipo, also coming from an academic background, is there anything that you think private education should, well, not just private, but higher education should be doing in this space?
Yeah, I think my challenge is that most of the higher education space or lecturers themselves, we have less understanding of the strategic objectives or strategic policies that the country has, or Africa has, or the world has, so that we can understand that the education we do has to fit into these initiatives. So I think that's one gap I've noticed. It has not been linked correctly. How does fashion contribute to the NDP, for instance, to African Growth and Opportunity Act, to Vision 2025, and all those things. So if that alignment can be done, we can close half the challenges that are there in that space. And I think also universities are not yet capitalized well, in a sense that we should be leading in terms of knowledge, but the machinery we use is outdated. It's quite expensive to buy that machinery, have a graduate that knows how to use the latest technology. We've been trying to buy a 3D body scanner to do this sizing for years now, very close to getting it now. But without engaging research partners, without engaging universities outside of South Africa, you will not know what is the gap that exists. In May, we went to Ethiopia on a conference, visited one of the universities there. I was astonished at the level of research that is done there. Leather, textiles, amazing things that when I look at the research we do in South Africa, 5-10 years from now, we will be going to those countries to source expertise, to source innovation and so forth. I think it's because we are not aware of how these strategic objectives must translate into classroom activity. Largely, it's because the material we use is not from South Africa. The books we use are from various countries. So we are catching up because they wrote those books, they've long excelled in those aspects, and now we want to get those books. Lecturers also prefer using outdated books because it's quite easy to use. They don't want to read again and change the curriculum. So you reproduce students that have this outdated expertise. I mean, the book I used for CMT 2007, I saw it being bought now, and I said, no. So these are the gaps that keep us trapped, even though we think we're going forward, but the output is really not indicating that we are transformative.
Absolutely. I just want to invite you to close the loop on this discussion of the role of higher education by maybe referring to research. I know you've written extensively about the triple helix and how we can capitalize on those three different aspects. So if we're talking about the government, we're talking about industry, education, how can they work together to make sure that all of these things are realized, that there aren't any gaps in between what each of these different fields is doing to make sure that this master plan is a success?
Yeah, I think at the essence of that research is the National Systems of Innovation, simply put, deals with how research is translated from paper up until products and services that can improve the country's socio-economic conditions. So government has a role to regulate policy and fund innovation that has to take place. Universities must produce cutting-edge research that is also transferred into industry. Industry must have the ability to take up these new products and put them into production quicker. Your social organizations are there to ensure that sustainability is enforced and there are no violation of human rights. So there's a triple helix, there's a quadruple helix. There's one that comes from my study, which I call the diamond helix, which fosters competitive advantage. So if government sets up policies, they must make sure that they fund the achievement of these policies. And universities must be aware what is the government's vision or drive. And they need to ensure that the research that they do advances those strategic objectives. The curriculums that we have actually ensure that we have the generation that will take up these objectives. Government, industry, when they receive funding from government, they need to understand what is their role as the sector. It can be that we have cutting edge products, but retail will tell you that I'm not sure it's going to make money or not. Somebody must run that trial run. Somebody must confirm that it's going to make money or not. And this is where university and industry must now meet at your extended communication between the two to check we are doing this. Will you be able to take it up as industry? What are your challenges? Is it too expensive? How do we make it affordable? And all those aspects. So that chain has to work. And for it to work, industry must come into university to understand how we teach, tell us what are we not doing right, what's the research that we are doing, confirm it quickly. They must be the first people that receive findings before we publish. Once they receive them, they get the first movers advantage, they run with it quicker. That's where we know when we have a groundbreaking study, we don't publish it for the next 5 years so that we allow the industry to gain an advantage through that. This is what China has done with their innovative textiles that we are catching up on. So industry must know what is cutting edge that is worth them investing on. Government must know what is cutting edge that is worth them putting money behind, reconfiguring industries, reconfiguring value chains so that it supports that particular innovation. There's a mosquito repellent soap done at the CPUT. Government has not caught up to that as to how it can solve African problems. So each sector must be in each other's space. They must be able to operate from their environment and from the perspective of the other sphere so that they can spot these gaps that will be blind spots. Because if I'm in clothing, what I normally do is just clothing. I don't know what does government do. Government does not know what are my gaps. So the triple helix, the diamond, advocate for the interchanging of roles. I need to speak as an industrialist. I need to speak as a government technocrat. Government needs to speak as an academic, as an industrialist, so that we understand each other's role. And we must exchange in these roles. If a government is going to this international bilateral trade, an academic needs to advocate what do we need. If a business person is going into your BRICS meetings and so forth, they need to know what do we need in order to propel the products that they do. So it's that interchanging that has to happen. Countries that do it much better, they have better competitive advantage. Your techies are rising up in terms of clothing. Your Ethiopia will also rise up quickly because that chain works much better.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. I will now invite you ladies to talk about the consumer's role. I mean, we did mention earlier that maybe we need to educate our consumers as well, that they also have a role to play in this stake. And what would that be? Let's start with you, Silva.
So just to carry on what the doctor was saying, a lot of these procedures and, ideas, they sound great, but I am a small business. I am constantly in survival mode. When you're in survival mode, you don't have time to do research and all these glamorous, fun things. You're literally working hand to mouth, and the only source of income you have is your customer. And that's why it is so important from a small business that you have customers that are educated, and why it is so important to buy locally. This master plan, it sounds as though, we want to hit the ground running. We want to have these massive CMTs and turn over millions of garments every month. But how does that start? It starts with me. It starts with small CMTs, small businesses, and they need to grow. And if there's no funding or government support in place for small businesses, the only support we will have is the customer. And that's why with my brand, I do a lot of talks with my clients and customers, and I tell people how important it is, to buy locally, to support local, because we can only get to that level with our customers and with local support.
Absolutely. Any thoughts, Shannon?
Yeah, I'm very conflicted on this topic as a consumer and someone who's launching and helping people launch, because I understand that, like I said, most South African businesses play in the mid to lux market. And for the average person, average student, anyone who's got disposable income, cannot always afford a Rich McKinsey garment. But there are ways that we can support local. Even if you buy from Pick and Pay clothing, just check the wash care label and see where it's made. Just get into that habit. Research and look and support these designers that you admire that are aspirational to you by going on their Instagram and commenting on their things and telling, getting those brands visible so that those who can afford those garments, just by luck of the algorithm, will see those brands as well. So it's not necessarily that if supporting local means you have to have thousands of brands to buy one jacket. Ackermans, Pick and Pay, Mr. Price, even they've got a lot of product now that's actually made within the country, and they still have a lot of product that isn't. So just when you're buying something, just check the label and see if it says made in South Africa, and that's a good start. That's a great start for you to start supporting your local economy.
All right. Before we move on to the final stages of this discussion, I just want to invite you, Jenna, again, to maybe from a BCom perspective, because we have a BCom in fashion that talks about these things. We students problematize all of these things. They do their research. I mean, it's undergrad, but these are the discussions that the students have. From that perspective, what do you think is the role of higher education, especially in terms of not only training our students or graduates who understand their role within this large sector, but how they interact and engage and educate, hopefully, the consumer?
It's hard because I think the way in which South Africans engage with fashion is quite extreme. It's on two extremes there. And I think for our BCom students, they're really enthusiastic about getting into the space. A lot of the times it happens through marketing. A lot of the times it even happens in the buying space, the merchandising space, the planning space. And I think what we've been able to do, and we've got one of our buying and planning and merchandise lecturers here tonight, and we've been able to make sure that we've got a balance of that idea that we're not in a good space right now for the future of South Africa with the fashion, within the fashion lens. But we are educating them to make sure that in the future they can make better decisions. And I think that's what we really are exposing them to say, what is sustainability? And it's not just, oh, let's make the environment okay. It's also business sustainability. Like, how can we make the next, you can't all work at a TFG or a Mr. Price, but we can support those small businesses or those medium-sized businesses and give them the better, we all wish we had a Shanghai, every single one, but hopefully we'll have like a part of that they have it's an amazing thing that our BCom does, because it gives you the business, which Shanghai has told us you don't really get from a fashion degree. But they do get the fashion. They get the fashion practice. They get the fashion textiles. They understand how it looks, how it feels. So that balance, I think, can make better business professionals, better fashion professionals to make better decisions.
Absolutely. Can I just say, I want to commend Stadio on the variety of courses that you give to students and opportunities to actually understand that the fashion world and the opportunities to work is so much more than becoming a buyer or a planner. There's so many careers you can have within this industry. And the fact that you're expanding it now to include clothing production. Where I'm from, my summer holidays in high school, I got to work at Truworths Zimbabwe. And that's when I first saw what a product manufacturing, because they made everything in-house. And I never saw that until I was hired as a trainee by Fashini here throughout my education. And I was like, how is that possible that I've never worked on an industrial machine until I got my first job and I'm a fashion student? It didn't make sense. And I'm seeing that here, you're really well equipped. And your lecturers are incredibly knowledgeable, and the breadth of the education and information that you're giving your students, by the time they graduate, they know which sector they want to sit in. I had to discover that. Started here, and then I was there, and then until I figured out, like, oh, okay, this is what I want to do, because all I was taught was how to be a great designer. You know, I wasn't taught how to be a great business person, even a mentor. I had to learn how styling worked. You've had stylists here as lecturers, fabulous people, you know, that are really, and they all have industry experience from what I've seen. Your best lecturers have industry experience because they know what it's going to take to start a business, and they want to send the students out who are most likely 3/4 of your students aren't going to get a job in this climate, to be honest. They have to start businesses. So I commend you on that. Your kids are some of the best equipped graduates in the industry.
Thank you very much. And I think much of that is due to these conversations that we have with industry. We're not working in silos. We're not just figuring out and saying, oh, Jenna really knows business and marketing, so let's just take her at her word and we run with that. It's always, there's continuous conversations with industry, and we have an amazing amount of collaborators that we work with from the industry, from different aspects of the industry. So I think that is very important. And again, it comes back towards Dr. Sipho mentioned that everybody needs to know what is happening in the different spaces. You need to know what the government is planning so that you can educate graduates who will be able to be employed or employable, or at least start their own businesses. You need to know what the Foshinis and TFGs are up to, what they want, what they need, so that you produce people who will be employable. So I think that relationship is one that is key, and that underlines and underscores everything we do. So thank you very much for confirming that. Okay, so before I hand over to Jenna to just engage with the audience and any questions that they might have, let's talk about either brands or specific people within the different pockets of industry who are doing quite well when it comes to transforming the value chain for manufacturing in the country, when it comes to just excelling in all of these different things that we spoke about inclusivity and transformation. Do you guys have any star brands? Do you have any, examples that you feel like this one person is doing exactly what we're talking about, and everybody should be looking up to them, and everybody should be learning from them? And maybe I can start with you, Justice.
Yeah, I think I had an experience working with Pick n Pay. They called me to facilitate one of their events where they had Kevin Raja, who mentored, I think, about 4 students from nothing into them developing ranges that were put at Pick n Pay. Those that were successful lines, they were given an opportunity the following year. So I think that initiative from Pick n Pay was absolutely great. If it can be multiplied by all retail stores, I think that would work. I think if it's Fedusa, if I'm correct, there's another private college that I've seen, Fedusa, thank you. They work with K-Way. They've got the second year students work sold there, their storyboards and all of that. I think that's also commendable. One of my students who's doing masters showed me a letter yesterday that YDE approved his postgraduate collection, that he must sell it in 5 stores. He must now answer questions like, how is he going to confirm quality? So I was quite amazed that, okay, if they are looking at new talent that is out there to bring it in, so those are good stories that are out there. And then your SA Fashion Week, your IFI, the initiative on the track competitions they run, they also help in launching students into these platforms. So I can mention those as innovative things that are happening around.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And Silva?
I mean, so being a CMT, I see this every day. My clients, a lot of them sell to Big Blue. There's YDE as well. The space is also doing amazing things for South African designers. And what's really great for me is watching as my clients grow, I grow as well. But one of the things that I want to touch on as somebody who's an advocate for sustainable and ethical fashion is if you look in the smaller communities, so we actually did a project with somebody called the Many Hands Project, and this amazing woman named Jolene who's taught these ladies how to sew in a rural community, but not only that, but also how to start a business and sell their garments sustainably. So we did a project with them where they actually made the mini hats kimono that I'm wearing at the moment. And I just think that's very inspiring, you know, when you go to these smaller towns and you see people trying to help each other. It's all about collaboration and coming together as a community. And, you know, those things actually inspire me more than, you know, these amazing Christian Dior designers. You know, that's, you know, it's yeah, that's my personal belief.
Yeah. And your example, Shannon?
Of course, we've got our superstars that everybody knows, their household names. In South Africa, we're out conquering the world. Hopefully, don't forget about us on the way there. But you'll see their designs always start from here. So that's great. And then we're seeing shoe brands, Batu and Drip are coming out. I'm not entirely sure if all the manufacturers local, because I don't think everything they make can be made here. Like you're talking about, the footwear sector is very unregulated, but they are creating a brand that is uniquely identifiable as South African, and their target market was the township to begin with, because they didn't have access to Adidas and Nike, and they're like, but we like nice things too, but we want to buy something that speaks to us. And I also commend, outside of South Africa, there are agencies that are now starting to open up that have a sole focus on promoting African and diasporic brands. Agencies like The Folklore. If you don't know them, please look them up. You will find a lot of our South African brands are actually selling on this platform. And not only are they selling their product, and they're based in New York, not only are they selling their product there, but this agency is giving these brands access to department stores within the US to sell their product and grow their businesses. I'm seeing that as a global trend at the moment. I just wish more brands knew about it. I'm loving that Africa is being embraced as a talented and skilled continent and desirable. I'm loving that the brands that are being promoted are slow fashion brands, things that people are not going to throw away next week, which inherently makes us more sustainable. I'd love to stay in that space. We don't have to compete with Zara and an H&M. Like I said, there is a market for their product. I don't want to be the one trying to compete with them. It's not a model I believe in, but I understand the need for that product. As long as those companies are being held accountable, which you amazing Gen Zers are doing. We're seeing it now. Us millennials kind of failed there. We kind of looked and bought it anyways. The Gen Zers are like, you need to tell us what this is all about and where you make and being accountable. So that's amazing. I'm really excited for the future of fashion, just because of the graduates that are coming out now are so outspoken and so confident. I did not have this kind of confidence when I graduated. I was very unsure and just took what I was told to be true. And so for the young kids who are entering the industry, question everything, learn as much as you can, get as much experience as you can from whoever will give it to you. And when your time comes to pass it on, pass it on.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much. Jenna, I'm going to hand over to you if you have any questions online even from yourself.
We do have an online question, and we have Danilo who's got their hand up. So I'm going to start with the questions to you, Silva. So Robert, he's asking, what kind of strategies do you use for client retention? Being a small business, I'm sure trying to compete is tough, especially when focused on staff retention and other as well.
Sure. Okay, wait. So the first part of the question
is really focused on client retention.
Okay, so I have good relationships with my clients. A lot, like I said before, it's all about collaboration. So, I will give them contact details for suppliers or, any other things that you'll need. There's no need to keep anything a secret. Just work with them, take their ideas and follow it and do whatever, they would like to do, but obviously within reason, and just work along with them. And it's all about being honest and open with your clients and just doing the best job you can do.
Thanks.
And then the second part of the question.
That was just a bit of an empathetic kind of saying, it must be tough just to have.
Yes, it is tough.
Thank you. All right. We've got Daneo. Daneo, you can unmute yourself. We should be able to hear you.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, I'm Dineo from Dineo Creations. It's my first time. I didn't get the question. I think it's Shangai's question. When she was giving us information, she spoke about the agent. So I couldn't quite get the agent's name that exposes African brands internationally.
The folklore, my accent, FOLKLORE.
Yeah. L
Or they're based in
L
New
O.
York. If you Google the folklore New York, you should be directed to their website.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to also, because there has been a release from the DTI about changes, movements within the master plan. So I thought I might as well share it with us, topic. So Pepkor has been able to support a 30 million rand new factory, which has created 40 new jobs, again, which we want to be seeing more of. Pacini Group made a 350 million investment in expanding its apparel factories. Mr. Price made a 30 million rand investment to develop and support local small-scale cotton farmers. The master plan contributed to the empowerment of people with disabilities through the launch of the new prestige clothing factory for the hearing impaired in Hillbrow, Johannesburg. And then there was one here by a change through TFG, who's partnered with Fiber Processing and Manufacturing CETA and the Tandeka Vocation Education Trust to provide a modern working environment for learners of St. Vincent's School for the Deaf. Through the partnership, the first intake of 23 learners will complete the NQF Level 2 learnership in October 2021, which was last year. An additional 24 learners will complete this year, and the third intake at the end of the year. So nice to see good movement, obviously, from this master plan.
Absolutely. And I think, Jenna, I want to start with you with the closing remarks. Do you have anything that you wish our audience and those online and those who are here with us this evening, what do you want them to take with before I move on to our panelists?
Thank you, Nande. I feel that we've had so much rich information, which has equipped us to start new conversations. And those conversations need to be fueled with the intention to educate more. Obviously, that's why we're here, but also to make sure that the education that we put through is that value chain of making sure that we know what the outcome should look like from the different stakeholders around us. So for me, it's just that request that when you go forward creating anything new, whether it's developing an assessment, developing a line, developing anything that you think about the multitude of stakeholders that are in this country and that need us to think about them when we do that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jenna. And Dr. Sipho, we'll start with you with your closing remarks.
I think for me, it was an absolute nice journey to have a blend of private and public, forming a discussion of this nature. I think I've learned a lot around CMTs and consulting that's taking place in the space. I've been buried into the academic space and research. I've lost track what's happening around there. So it was refreshing to get those perspectives. It's good to look at policy, but it's good to hear from people that are actually on the ground doing the work. What are their challenges versus policies that are out there? So I think that for me has been great. I think such initiatives should probably be expanded or continue. I don't think enough word is out there in terms of how to move ahead or how to go over these challenges. So such platforms have been great.
Thank you very much. We thank you for joining us and for your insights. We are now a lot wiser on when we started. So thank you very much for that. And Silva?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I definitely learned a lot from the doctor as well. I mean, like I said, I'm in the factory all day, every day. I don't have time to do all this research. So it was very insightful for me, and I'm very excited for the future. As a small CMT and a small fashion brand, I'm excited to grow with everyone.
Thank you. Shanghai?
I'll go in the opposite direction and do some self-promotion. Please visit my website for some resources and videos and access to any other panels that I've done with Stadio. The videos are linked there. My website is dsgn, just designnative.com. And the same for the Instagram handle at dsgnnative. And also you can find information on the short learning program. It's only 8 weeks. 5,000 rands, 2 hours on a Saturday. So even if you have a full-time job, it's something you can commit to. And if you want to start a business, I highly recommend you do this online course because it's not looking at the design aspects, because anyone who wants to start a fashion brand already has an idea of what the product that they want to do is, but it's going to help you figure out your entrepreneurial journey and how to turn an idea into an actual sellable brand. So those will be my closing remarks.
You're most welcome. Thank you for everybody for joining us. I think from my side, I can just remind everyone of the key things that I think we can take away from this session, especially if we're thinking about including everybody who has been working or functioning on the outskirts of the sector and who hasn't really been centralized with either the infrastructure, the knowledge, the expertise, and all of that we have to offer. Think about what the panelists have said. They've mentioned a lot of alignment between the different industries. They've mentioned a lot of collaboration. So essentially, all the different pockets of this industry need to function as links in one chain because we're all part of this value chain. So each person must be doing their part to make sure that everything comes together very nicely and everybody benefits from it. So thank you for joining us, to everyone online and to everyone here. Thank you very much for coming through. We will see you guys for the next session.
Yes, that's the thing that I have to end off. There is. We have our next session, our spring session. It is coming at you next week. If you give me 1 second. I got so absorbed in the conversation that the one thing I was asked to do.
One thing to do.
I have one job. Okay, hold on. Right, so we are very excited. We are looking at the different aspects of our 2030 plan, obviously looking at what the master plan means to us. And there we go. Okay, so the next session is
Drum roll, please.
drum roll. This is going to be so exciting that you just have to wait 1 more second. Gosh. And just to let everybody knows, we will be load shedded in about 6 minutes.
Yes.
So any feeds and things like that will probably be cut. Oh gosh.
And that's not in the master plan.
We need to talk about that. Right. So our spring session, the next one is on the 19th of September at 4 to 5:30, a little bit different. And the topic is going to be local digital fashion. So our it's very cute. Our speakers have their NFT or whatever, those emoji thing. It's going to be James Barrett Paulson, who's one of our lecturers here at Stadio, Bianca Van Heerden as well, and Mandla Mangwaza, who is coming to us from Entertainment Analytics. So we're very much looking forward to seeing you at the next spring session. Thank you, everybody, so much.
Thank you.
And,